The chamber fell silent as the hologram flickered to life above the council table. 17 star systems glowed red on the display, each one a recent conquest of the Vrecken Collective. The assembled representatives from across the galaxy shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their varied forms casting strange shadows in the dim light. Commander Thale of the Vrecken fleet stood at the center of the room, his tall frame rigid with military pride. His skin had the metallic sheen common to his species, and his 3 eyes scanned the room with cold calculation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The human colonies in the Outer Rim have 72 hours to surrender, Thale announced. Comply, and your people will be integrated into the collective as productive citizens. Resist, and we will take what we need by force. Ambassador Jen Wei sat perfectly still at the human delegation table. She was a small woman by human standards, her gray hair pulled back in a simple knot, her face lined with years of diplomatic service. Around her, other species representatives began whispering among themselves, some with pity, others with resignation. Everyone in the chamber knew the mathematics of war. The Corellia ambassador, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline form, spoke first. Ambassador Chun, surely Earth recognizes the impossibility of military resistance? The Vrecken fleet outnumbers your colonial defense forces 3-1. Their weapons technology is superior. This is not a battle you can win. Chun smiled, a small expression that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for your concern, she said quietly. But Earth will not be abandoning its citizens. Thale's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. Your loyalty is admirable, but foolish. We have studied your species extensively. Your military capabilities are adequate but unremarkable. Your technology is decades behind ours. Your ships are slower, your weapons weaker, your soldiers less experienced in actual combat. He gestured to the hologram, which shifted to show detailed schematics of human military assets. We know everything about you. I'm sure you do, Chun replied. Her tone remained pleasant, almost conversational. Tell me, Commander, in all your research about humanity, did your analysts study our entertainment? The question hung in the air like a discordant note. Several representatives exchanged confused glances. Thale's expression flickered with something that might have been irritation. Entertainment is irrelevant to military assessment, he said. Is it? Chun stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked to the center of the chamber, her soft footsteps echoing in the vast space. Before you commit your forces to this action, Commander, I want to share something with you. With all of you. She pulled a small device from her pocket and activated it. The hologram shifted again, but this time it didn't show star charts or battle statistics. Instead, images began to flicker across the display. Strange images. Disturbing images. The first showed a human dwelling in darkness, something moving in the shadows just beyond sight. The next showed a figure with pale skin and hollow eyes, its mouth open in a silent scream. Another displayed a massive creature with too many teeth, rising from an ocean depth. The images came faster now, each one more unsettling than the last. Twisted faces, impossible geometries, scenes of violence and terror, creatures that couldn't exist, but somehow did in the human imagination. Around the chamber, representatives began to react. Some looked away. Others made sounds of distress in their native languages. The Corellian ambassador's crystalline form actually dimmed, as if trying to reduce its sensory input. What is this? Thale demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. What are you showing us? Horror movies, Chun said simply. Scary stories. Video games designed to frighten the player. Haunted house attractions where humans pay money to be terrified. Books written for the sole purpose of keeping readers awake at night in fear. She paused, letting her words sink in. This is what humans create for fun, Commander. The images continued to cycle. A human child reading a book about monsters under the bed. Teenagers watching a film about serial killers, eating snacks and laughing when they got scared. Adults playing virtual reality games where they ran from zombies or ghosts or aliens intent on their destruction. Every human civilization in our history has created stories meant to frighten. Chun continued. We tell our children about monsters in the dark, about things that hunt in the night, about the terrible things that might happen if they're not careful. We make art about our deepest fears. We build entire industries around scaring ourselves. This proves nothing, Theo said, but his voice had an edge to it now. Fear is a weakness. You celebrate your own vulnerability, do we? Chun turned to face him directly. Or have we learned to live with fear so intimately that it no longer controls us? Have we studied it so thoroughly that we understand exactly how it works, exactly how to create it, exactly how to use it? She deactivated the display, and the chamber lights returned to normal. Several representatives looked shaken. The Corellian ambassador was still dim, its energy signature fluctuating with what might have been distress. Commander Thale, Chun said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. Your analysts studied our military capabilities. They studied our technology, our tactics, our history of warfare. But they made one critical mistake. And what is that? Thale asked. They assumed that humans fight the way everyone else does. Chun returned to her seat, her movements calm and measured. They assumed that our weapons would be familiar, our strategies conventional, our approach to warfare something you could predict and counter. She sat down and folded her hands on the table before her. The colonies in the Outer Rim will not surrender. If you attack them, you will learn what every predator on Earth eventually learned. Which is? Thale demanded. Chun's smile returned, but this time it was different, colder. That humans are the species that turned fear into entertainment. We are the only beings in the galaxy who deliberately frighten ourselves for fun, who study terror as an art form, who understand exactly how to make nightmares real. She leaned forward slightly. You're welcome to test our defenses, Commander. But I promise you this. The Vrecken Collective has never encountered psychological warfare the way humans practice it. Your soldiers have never faced an enemy that knows how to make them afraid. The chamber erupted in noise as representatives began talking over each other. Some demanded clarification. Others protested that psychological warfare was barbaric. A few, the ones who had studied human history more carefully, sat in thoughtful silence. Commander Thale stood motionless, his three eyes fixed on Ambassador Chun, for the first time since entering the chamber. He looked uncertain. 72 hours, he finally said. The ultimatum stands. Then in 72 hours, Chun replied quietly, your people will learn why you should never threaten a species that evolved alongside its nightmares. Thale turned and left the chamber, his footsteps heavy and quick. As he disappeared through the doorway, Chun allowed herself a longer look at the remaining representatives. Some met her eyes with fear, others with curiosity, a few with something that might have been respect. The Corellian ambassador finally regained its normal brightness. Ambassador Chun, it said softly, what have you done? Chun stood and gathered her materials. What I had to do, she said. What humans have always done when backed into a corner. She headed toward the exit, then paused and looked back. We've given them fair warning. What happens next is their choice. As she left, the chamber remained in chaos, representatives arguing about ethics and legality and the nature of warfare itself. None of them noticed the small smile on Chun's face as she walked away, or the message she quietly sent to the human colonies in the Outer Rim. 2 words. Begin preparations. The Vrecken fleet arrived at New Nairobi exactly 72 hours after the ultimatum expired. 300 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of the system's star. On the bridge of the flagship, Commander Thale watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The human colony world hung before them, blue and green and utterly vulnerable. "Status report," Thale ordered. His tactical officer, a younger Vraken named Srel, manipulated the holographic controls. "Scanning complete, Commander. We detect 47 human defense vessels in orbit. They match our intelligence reports exactly. No hidden forces, no unusual deployments. And the colony itself? Population centers are active. Communications networks are running normally. No signs of evacuation or panic." Srel paused, his mandibles twitching. "Actually, Commander, that's strange. Their civilian broadcasts are continuing as if nothing is happening." Thale moved closer to examine the data himself. Srel was right. The planet below was transmitting on all frequencies, business as usual. Television programs, music, data traffic, everything one would expect from a functioning colony. No emergency broadcasts. No martial law declarations. No evacuation orders. They're probably in shock, Thale decided. Paralyzed by fear of the inevitable. Open a channel to the colonial government. The communication officer established the link. A human woman appeared on the screen, middle-aged with dark skin and calm eyes. She wore civilian clothes, not a military uniform. "This is Governor Martinez of New Nairobi," she said. Her voice was steady. "I assume you're here to accept our surrender." Thale felt a moment of satisfaction. "You assume correctly. Prepare to receive our occupation forces. All military assets will be transferred to collective control immediately. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force." Martinez nodded slowly. "Of course. Though I should mention, Commander, we've prepared something for your troops. A welcoming gift, you might say. We require no gifts. We require compliance." "You'll get both," Martinez said, and smiled. It was not a warm smile. "See you soon, Commander." The transmission ended. Thale stared at the blank screen for a moment, then shook off the odd feeling the conversation had left him with. Fear made people say strange things. He turned back to his crew. "Deploy ground forces. Establish orbital superiority. This will be over by nightfall." The human defense fleet engaged according to predictable patterns. They fought, took losses, and retreated toward the planet's surface. By the time darkness fell on New Nairobi's largest continent, Recon forces held complete control of orbital space and had established landing zones in 3 major cities. That was when things started to change. Lieutenant Krell led his squad through the empty streets of Port Darwin, one of New Nairobi's coastal cities. The buildings stood intact but abandoned, doors hanging open, vehicles left in the middle of roads. The humans had fled, leaving behind a ghost town. "Maintain formation," Krell ordered. His soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, weapons ready, sensors active. Everything was going according to plan. Then the broadcast started. At first, Krell thought it was interference in his helmet's audio system. A low sound, barely at the edge of hearing. But as his squad moved deeper into the city, the sound grew clearer. It was coming from the human speakers mounted on every street corner, the ones they used for emergency announcements. It was music. Strange music. Human music with no melody, just discordant sounds and what might have been voices whispering in languages Krell didn't recognize. His translator software struggled to make sense of it, spitting out fragments. "Watching, behind you, never escape. They're coming." "Sir," one of his soldiers said, "should we disable those speakers?" Krell was about to agree when he noticed something else. The buildings around them had lights in the windows. Not bright lights, but dim ones, flickering like candles. And on the walls, projected somehow, were images. The same kinds of disturbing images Ambassador Chun had shown the council. Pale faces with hollow eyes. Figures in shadow. Things that looked almost Reckon but wrong. Twisted, like corpses reanimated. Psychological warfare, Krell said, forcing his voice to remain steady. Ignore it. They're trying to unnerve us. But it was hard to ignore. As they moved through the streets, the images followed them. Sometimes they appeared on buildings ahead, as if leading them forward. Sometimes they flickered at the edges of vision, there one moment and gone the next. The music never stopped, that awful discordant sound with its whispered words. Krell's squad reached their objective, a government building that was supposed to serve as a command post. The structure was intact, power still running. But when they entered, they found the interior had been transformed. The hallways were dark, except for emergency lighting that cast everything in a red glow. The walls were covered in more images, but these were printed directly on the surfaces. Human horror imagery mixed with something else, something that made Krell's 3 stomachs clench. They were pictures from Vrecken history, ancient history that most modern Vreckens had never seen. Pictures of the predators that had once hunted Krell's ancestors on their homeworld, creatures that had been extinct for 10,000 years. How do they know about these? One of his soldiers whispered, his voice shaking. Krell didn't answer because he didn't know. The humans shouldn't have had access to Vrecken archaeological data. But there they were, perfect reconstructions of the night hunters that had plagued Vrecken evolution, the things that had made his species develop 3 eyes to watch all directions at once. They moved deeper into the building. Behind them, doors began to close on their own. Not slamming, just slowly swinging shut with soft clicks. The sound system in the building activated, and now the whispers were in Vrecken. His own language, speaking words he didn't want to hear. They're in the walls, the whispers said. They're in the dark. They never stopped hunting. They're here. They're here. They're here. Sir, we should fall back, one of his soldiers said. The younger Vrecken was trembling, his weapon shaking in his grip. Hold position, Krell ordered, but his own voice wasn't as firm as he wanted it to be. That was when they heard the footsteps. Heavy footsteps, coming from the floor above them. But when they checked their sensors, they showed no life signs. Nothing at all. The footsteps continued. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to the stairwell that would bring whatever was making them down to Krell's level. Sensor malfunction, Krell said. It has to be. But then all of their sensors went dark simultaneously. Every heads-up display, every tactical overlay, every environmental reading. Gone. They were left with just their eyes and the dim red light. Something appeared at the top of the stairs. At first, Krell thought it was a human soldier, but as it moved into the light, he realized it was wearing a mask. A white mask with no features except holes for eyes and a mouth. The mouth was smiling, a huge smile that was somehow worse than any frown. Behind the first figure came another, and another. All wearing masks, all moving in perfect silence except for those heavy footsteps. They didn't carry visible weapons. They didn't speak. They just walked down the stairs slowly, one step at a time. Fire! Krell shouted. His squad opened fire. The energy blast lit up the hallway, striking the masked figures. But the figures didn't fall. They didn't even slow down. They just kept walking, kept approaching, kept smiling behind those terrible masks. One of Krell's soldiers broke. He turned and ran for the exit, screaming in terror. Another followed. Then another. Krell found himself backing away, his weapon still firing uselessly at the approaching figures. His rational mind knew this was a trick. Had to be a trick. Holograms or robots or something explainable. But his instincts, the deep wrecking instincts that remember being prey, remember being hunted, remembered terror in the darkness. Those instincts were screaming at him to run. So he ran. Outside, in the streets of Port Darwin, similar scenes were playing out across the city. Wrecking soldiers retreating from buildings where nothing visible chased them, but where everything felt wrong. Units reporting casualties from fights that never happened. Soldiers swearing they'd been attacked by things that sensors couldn't detect. In orbit, Commander Thale listened to the reports with growing unease. His ground forces held their positions, but barely, and the casualty lists were growing. Not from combat injuries, but from what the medical officers were calling acute stress reactions. It's just psychological warfare, Thale told himself, staring at the planet below. But he remembered Ambassador Chun's words, her warning, and for the first time since beginning this campaign, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt afraid. On New Nairobi's surface, in hidden bunkers scattered across the planet, human psychological operations teams monitored their equipment and adjusted their programs. They watched the Vrecken troops through hacked sensors, observed their reactions, measured their stress levels, and calibrated their next moves. Dr. Sarah Voss, the lead psychologist for Operation Nightmare, studied the data with professional satisfaction. They're responding exactly as predicted, she told her team. Their evolutionary psychology makes them especially vulnerable to predator fear responses. And we've barely started. She pulled up a new program on her screen, one they'd been saving for night operations. Let's show them what humans really learned from a childhood of being scared, she said softly. Let's show them why we became the species that makes fear into art. Around her, screens glowed with readouts and feeds. On one monitor, a Vrecken soldier curled in a corner, whimpering. On another, an entire unit fled an empty building. On a third, their medical team struggled to treat soldiers who had no physical injuries, but were convinced they were dying. Dr. Voss smiled, though there was no humor in it. Phase 2 begins at midnight, she announced. And Phase 2 is when things get really scary. Back at the Galactic Council headquarters, Ambassador Chun stood before the assembled representatives once more. 3 days had passed since the Vrecken invasion of New Nairobi began. 3 days that had changed everything. The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed live feeds from the planet's surface. Vrecken forces still held their positions, still controlled the strategic locations, still maintained orbital superiority. By every traditional military metric, they were winning. But the representatives watching the feeds could see something was terribly wrong. Vrecken soldiers huddled together in groups, their weapons pointed at nothing, their sensors scanning empty air. Medical transports made constant trips between the surface and the fleet, carrying soldiers who showed no physical injuries, but who screamed and thrashed and begged not to be sent back. Supply depots sat abandoned because no one would enter them alone. Command posts went dark because the officers inside refused to give orders. The Corellian ambassador spoke first, its crystalline form pulsing with agitation. Ambassador Chun, what have your people done? This is not warfare. This is torture. Chun stood calmly at her position, her hands folded in front of her. This is exactly what I warned would happen. The Vreckens invaded our colony. We are defending it using the tools we have available. But there's no actual combat, the Corellian protested. Your soldiers aren't even engaging their forces directly. You're just scaring them. Yes, Chun agreed simply. A representative from the Korthan Federation, a species that resembled large insects, clicked its mandibles together. You have weaponized fear itself. How is this even possible? Chen gestured to the display, and it shifted to show a different view. This one showed the interior of a human operations center on New Nairobi. Men and women sat at computer terminals, monitoring screens filled with data. The room looked more like a movie production studio than a military facility. For thousands of years, Chun began, humanity has studied fear, not as something to avoid, but as something to understand and master. We created entire art forms around it. We wrote books designed to keep people awake at night. We made films that gave audiences nightmares. We built attractions where people paid money to be terrified. She walked slowly around the chamber as she spoke, making eye contact with different representatives. Every human culture has ghost stories, monster legends, tales of things that hunt in the dark. We told these stories to our children, not to traumatize them, but to prepare them. To teach them that fear is something you can face, something you can survive, something you can even enjoy. The display changed again, showing archived footage of human horror entertainment. Movies with monsters and killers. Video games where players fled from zombies. Books with covers designed to disturb. Virtual reality experiences that simulated every possible nightmare. We studied fear so thoroughly that we learned its mechanics. Chun continued. We know exactly which sounds trigger panic responses. We know which visual patterns the brain interprets as threatening. We understand how isolation amplifies anxiety, how uncertainty breeds terror, how the imagination creates fears worse than reality. Commander Thale's voice suddenly erupted from the Council's communication system. He hadn't been invited to attend this session, but apparently he didn't care. His image appeared on a secondary screen, and the assembled representatives could see that he looked haggard. His metallic skin had lost its sheen, and his 3 eyes darted around as if searching for threats. Chun, he said, his voice hoarse, call off your psychological attacks. This is inhumane. You invaded our colony, Chun replied calmly. You threatened our citizens. You fired on our ships. And now you're upset because we're defending ourselves in ways you didn't anticipate? Your people aren't defending anything, Thale shouted. They're hiding in bunkers while their computers and holograms and sound systems drive my soldiers insane. They're not fighting, they're just making us afraid. Yes, Chun said again, with that same simple directness. That's the point, Commander. You came here expecting conventional warfare. You came prepared for battles and sieges and casualties. But humans learned long ago that the most effective way to defeat an enemy isn't always to kill them. Sometimes it's much more effective to make them too afraid to fight. She turned back to the Council. Every species in this chamber evolved from prey animals. You remember being hunted. Your instincts tell you to run from danger, to hide, to freeze when predators are near. Those are survival mechanisms programmed into you by millions of years of evolution. Chun paused, letting her words sink in. But humans? We evolved as hunters. Our fear response includes fighting back. And more importantly, we learned to play with fear, to study it, to turn it into entertainment. We're the only species that deliberately frightens itself for fun. That gave us a unique understanding of how fear works. The display showed new footage now. Human researchers working with advanced AI systems, feeding them data from thousands of horror movies, analyzing the psychological profiles of different alien species, creating simulations of how to trigger fear responses in beings they'd never met. 20 years ago, Chun explained, after the first contact with other species, human military theorists realized we had a unique capability. We could use our cultural knowledge of fear as a weapon. We began cataloging the psychology of every species we encountered. We studied your evolutionary histories, your ancient predators, your collective nightmares. We built databases of sounds and images and situations that would trigger panic in different species. The Corellian ambassador's light flickered. That's monstrous, is it? Chun asked. Is it more monstrous than actual violence? More monstrous than killing? The Vreekans came to conquer us, to take our world, to subjugate our people. We're stopping them without firing a shot, without taking lives, without destroying anything but their willingness to fight. If anything, this is the most humane form of warfare ever invented. On the communication screen, Thales slumped in his command chair. "You don't understand what it's like down there," he said quietly. "My soldiers see things that aren't real. They hear voices in languages they shouldn't know. They find evidence of predators that have been extinct for 10,000 years. They wake up from nightmares that continue when they open their eyes." "I know exactly what it's like," Chun said, and for the first time, her voice held an edge. "Because humans live with that every day. We create those nightmares. We consume them. We teach them to our children. The difference is, we learn to survive them. We learned that fear is just an emotion, just chemicals in the brain, just signals that can be understood and controlled." She turned to face Thales' image directly. "Your people never learned that lesson, Commander. You eliminated all your predators, built safe civilizations, removed every source of fear from your environment. You made yourselves comfortable, secure, protected. And in doing so, you made yourselves vulnerable to anyone who understands how fear works." The chamber was silent, except for the ambient hum of the environmental systems. The representatives watched Chun with expressions ranging from horror to fascination to something that might have been fear itself. "You want to know our secret weapon?" Chun asked, addressing the entire council. "It's not advanced technology. It's not superior tactics. It's not even courage or determination. Our secret weapon is that we're the species that turned our nightmares into movies, our fears into stories, our terror into entertainment. We're the species that looked at the things that frightened us and decided to understand them instead of just running away." She gestured to the display, which now showed a human child, perhaps 10 years old, sitting in a darkened theater watching a horror film. The child's eyes were wide, hands gripping the armrests, clearly scared. But the child didn't leave, didn't look away, just watched, learning, understanding, facing the fear. "That's what makes us different," Chun said softly. "Not that we don't feel fear. We feel it just as strongly as anyone else. But we learn to face it, to study it, to master it. And now, when someone threatens us, we can make them feel what we've learned to overcome." Commander Thales' image flickered. "How long will you continue this?" "Until you withdraw your forces from New Nairobi," Chun replied. "Until you sign a treaty promising never to threaten human colonies again. Until you convince every other species in the galaxy that humans are not to be invaded. And if we don't?" Chen's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "Then your soldiers will continue to experience fear on a scale they never imagined possible. We have thousands of years of horror entertainment to draw from, Commander. We have scenarios that can keep your troops in a state of terror for months. Years, if necessary. We can make fear so constant, so overwhelming, that your soldiers will beg to be anywhere else in the galaxy." She paused, then added quietly, "But it doesn't have to be that way. You can leave. You can take your fleet and go home. You can tell everyone what happened here. Warn them that humans don't fight the way other species fight. And then this ends, and no one else has to learn this lesson." Thales stared at her through the screen for a long moment. Around the council chamber, representatives held their collective breath. Finally, the Vrekan commander spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to consider." "You have 12 hours, Chun said. "After that, we move to Phase 3 of our operations. Trust me, Commander, you don't want to experience Phase 3. The communication ended. Thales' image disappeared, leaving just the feeds from New Nairobi showing Vrekan soldiers huddled in the darkness, afraid of shadows that might or might not be real. The Corellian ambassador turned to Chun. "What is Phase 3? Chun walked back to her position and sat down. She looked tired suddenly, older than her years. "Phase 3 is when we stop holding back," she said quietly. "When we use everything we've learned about fear. Every technique, every trick, every psychological manipulation we've developed over centuries of horror entertainment." She looked up at the Corellian. Phase 1 was just sounds and images. Phase 2 added the evolutionary triggers, the ancient predator fears. Phase 3. She trailed off, then shook her head. Phase 3 is when we make it personal. When we make each soldier experience their own individual nightmare, tailored specifically to their psychology, their history, their deepest fears. "And you would do this?" the Corellian asked. Chun met its gaze without flinching. "To protect my people? To save lives on both sides by ending this without actual combat? Yes, I would do it. Because that's what humans do. We face the nightmares. We become the nightmares if we have to. And we never ever back down when our people are threatened." The chamber fell silent once more. On the displays, the Vrecken soldiers continued their vigil, watching darkness for threats that might be real or might be nothing at all. Trapped in a war, they couldn't fight with weapons they couldn't see, facing an enemy that understood fear better than any species in the galaxy. 12 hours to decide. 12 hours until humanity showed the Vreckens what real terror looked like. 8 hours after Ambassador Chun's ultimatum, Commander Thale made his decision. The Vrecken fleet began withdrawal procedures from New Nairobi. 300 warships that had arrived in perfect formation now limped away in disarray. Their holds filled with soldiers who stared at nothing and flinched at shadows. The official Vrecken statement cited unforeseen tactical complications. But leaked reports told a different story. Of the 50,000 soldiers deployed to the surface, nearly 15,000 were in psychiatric care. Another 20,000 had refused to return to duty, some barricading themselves in their quarters, others sitting in corners and rocking back and forth while humming songs to drown out sounds that no one else could hear. The remaining 15,000 were functional but traumatized, jumping at sudden movements, refusing to enter darkened spaces, insisting on keeping lights on even during sleep cycles. The Vreckens hadn't just lost a battle. They'd had their sense of reality itself shattered. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address what many species were calling the human fear crisis. Representatives packed the chamber, some demanding sanctions against humanity, others calling for outright prohibition of psychological warfare. Still others arguing that humans had simply defended themselves with the tools available. Ambassador Chun stood at the center of the chamber once more, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Dr. Sarah Voss, the psychologist who had led Operation Nightmare, and Colonel Marcus Reed, the military commander who had coordinated New Nairobi's defense. The Korthon Federation representative spoke first, its insect-like body trembling with agitation. "You have introduced a new form of warfare to the galaxy, one that leaves no physical wounds but destroys minds. How is this not a crime?" Chun gestured to Dr. Voss, who stepped forward. The psychologist was younger than Chun, with tired eyes but a steady voice. "With respect," Dr. Voss said, "we didn't introduce anything new. Fear-based tactics have been used in warfare since warfare began. What we did was formalize those tactics, study them scientifically, and apply them with precision. But the fundamental principle, making your enemy too afraid to fight, that's as old as conflict itself. But the scale," the Korthon protested, "the systematic nature of it. You have machines that can analyze an individual's psychology and create personalized nightmares." "Yes," Dr. Voss agreed. "And those machines allowed us to defend our colony without killing a single Vrecken soldier. Not one. Can any other defensive action in galactic history make that claim? Murmurs spread through the chamber. The point was undeniable. Conventional warfare would have resulted in thousands of casualties on both sides. The human approach had resulted in none. The Corellian ambassador's crystalline form pulsed with light. But the psychological damage, the trauma your tactics inflicted, is that not a form of violence? It is, Chun said, stepping forward again. We're not claiming moral superiority here. What we did was warfare, and warfare always causes harm. But I'd like to propose a demonstration, if the council will permit it. The chamber fell silent. Several representatives exchanged nervous glances, remembering the disturbing images Chun had shown before the invasion. Nothing extreme, Chun assured them. Just a simple comparison. I'd like to show you what conventional warfare on New Nairobi would have looked like. She activated her portable display. The hologram that appeared showed projections and simulations. Computer models of the battle that might have been. Wrecking troops advancing through cities while human defenders fought back with conventional weapons. Buildings reduced to rubble. Casualty estimates scrolling past. 12,000 reckoned dead. 8,000 human colonists killed in crossfire. Entire neighborhoods destroyed. Infrastructure devastated. This is what your military analysts predicted if we had fought normally, Chun said quietly. 20,000 dead. Tens of thousands more wounded. A planet scarred by orbital bombardment and ground combat. Reconstruction that would take decades. She changed the display to show New Nairobi as it actually was. Cities intact. Infrastructure functioning. Not a single building destroyed. The only casualties were psychological, not physical. Instead, Chen continued, we have 0 deaths. 0 permanent physical injuries. Yes, the Vrecken soldiers are traumatized. But they're alive. Their families still have them. They can heal. Dead soldiers don't heal. Colonel Reed spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of combat experience. I fought in 3 wars before this one. I've seen what conventional warfare does. I've carried dying soldiers off battlefields. I've told families their loved ones weren't coming home. What happened on New Nairobi was disturbing, yes, but it was also merciful. Merciful? The Korthan representative sounded incredulous. You call psychological torture merciful? More merciful than death, Reed replied flatly. Those Vrecken soldiers are scared. They have nightmares. They need therapy. But they're breathing. Their hearts are beating. Their families can hug them. In any previous war, 15,000 of them would be corpses. Instead, they're patients. Patients can recover. Chun pulled up another display, this one showing footage from human psychiatric facilities that had been established to help treat the affected Vrecken soldiers. Human doctors working with Vrecken patients, using therapy techniques developed over centuries of treating human trauma. We're not monsters, Chun said. We knew our tactics would cause psychological harm, so we prepared for it. We've offered to provide counseling and treatment to every affected Vrecken soldier, free of charge. We're sharing our research on fear trauma and recovery. We're helping them heal. The Corellian ambassador dimmed slightly, considering. So you wound them psychologically, then offered to heal them? We defended our colony with non-lethal force, then offered humanitarian aid to those affected, Chun corrected. Is that so different from any other defensive action followed by medical care? The debate raged for hours. Some representatives argued that psychological warfare was inherently unethical. Others countered that all warfare was unethical, and at least this version didn't produce corpses. A few species, those who had studied human culture more carefully, pointed out that humans themselves were still debating the ethics of their own tactics. Finally, as the debate wound down, Chun requested permission to address the council one final time. I understand your concerns, she said. I understand that what humanity did on New Nairobi frightens many of you. Not just because of what it did to the Reckons, but because of what it means for the future. You're wondering if humans might use these tactics against you someday. She paused, looking around the chamber. So I'm going to make you a promise, and I'm going to make it formal. A treaty, if you will. Chun pulled out a datapad and projected its contents for all to see. The Human Fear Accord, she announced. Humanity agrees to strict limitations on the use of psychological warfare tactics. We will never deploy fear-based strategies against species engaged in peaceful relations with us. We will never use these tactics as a first resort, only as a defensive measure. We will always offer medical and psychological support to those affected by our tactics. She scrolled through the document. In exchange, we ask for formal recognition that non-lethal psychological defense is a legitimate form of self-defense under galactic law. We ask that the galaxy recognize humanity's right to protect itself using the cultural tools we've developed, just as other species use their own unique advantages. The Corthan representative studied the projected document. And if a species attacks you anyway, what then? Then we defend ourselves, Chine said simply. We've given fair warning now. Everyone in this chamber knows what humans are capable of. Anyone who chooses to invade our colonies or threaten our people despite that knowledge, they've made an informed decision to face the consequences. She closed the datapad and looked directly at the assembled representatives. Humanity doesn't want to be feared. We want to be left in peace. But if we can't have peace, we'll take fear. Because fear keeps us alive without killing others. Fear protects without destroying. And fear, unlike death, is something you can eventually overcome. The vote on the Human Fear Accord took 3 days. In the end, it passed with a narrow majority. Not because the representatives approved of psychological warfare, but because they couldn't deny its effectiveness or its relative mercy compared to conventional combat. The Accord established guidelines, restrictions, and oversight mechanisms. Humanity agreed to transparency about its fear-based capabilities and to limitations on when they could be deployed. In exchange, the galaxy formally recognized that humans had the right to defend themselves using psychological tactics. 5 years later, a classroom on the Vrecken homeworld sat in afternoon sunlight. Young Vreckens, their metallic skins still shiny with youth, sat at their desks while their instructor pulled up a historical lesson on the display. The incident at New Nairobi, the instructor began, and immediately half the students groaned. They'd all heard stories from relatives who'd been there, or who knew someone who'd been there. The event had become infamous in Vrecken culture. I know you've heard the stories, the instructor continued. The shadows that moved on their own. The sounds that made no sense. The fear that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. She paused. But today we're not going to talk about what happened. We're going to talk about why it happened. She changed the display to show images of Earth. Humans evolved on a dangerous world. Unlike us, who eliminated our predators early in our development, humans lived alongside theirs for millions of years. They were both predator and prey, both hunter and hunted. This gave them a unique relationship with fear. The students watched as the display showed human evolution, the development of human culture, the creation of human horror entertainment. While we were building safe cities and eliminating danger from our environment, the instructor said, humans were telling each other scary stories around fires. They were creating art meant to frighten. They were teaching their children to face their fears instead of just avoiding them. A student raised a hand. But why would they do that? Why frighten themselves on purpose? The instructor smiled sadly. Because they understood something we forgot. Fear isn't the enemy. Fear is a tool. It's information. It tells you when danger is near. Humans learn to use that information, to study it, to understand it so well that fear couldn't control them anymore. She changed the display again, this time showing Ambassador Chun's warning to Commander Thale before the invasion. They told us what they were capable of. They warned us. We didn't listen because we thought fear was weakness. We thought our superior numbers and technology would be enough. Were we wrong? Another student asked. Completely, the instructor said. We learned a hard lesson on New Nairobi. We learned that military strength isn't just about weapons and ships and soldiers. It's about understanding your enemy. And humans understood us better than we understood ourselves. They knew exactly which fears would affect us most because they made a science of fear itself. The lesson continued, covering the diplomatic aftermath, the human fear accord, the new tactical doctrines the Vrekan military had developed in response. By the end, the students sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, one student spoke up. So, what do we do now? Are humans our enemies? The instructor considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. Humans aren't our enemies. But they're not like other species either. They're the civilization that looked at their nightmares and decided to understand them. They're the people who turned fear into entertainment and then into protection. She pulled up one final image, a human child watching a horror movie, face scared but determined. Remember this, the instructor said. Every human child learns to face their fears eventually. Some learn through stories and controlled experiences. Others learn the hard way. She looked at her students seriously. We learned the hard way. Don't make our mistake. Respect humans not because they're strong, but because they understand fear better than anyone else in the galaxy. And never, ever threaten them unless you're prepared to learn what they learned long ago. The class ended. The students filed out, talking quietly among themselves. Above them, in orbit, a human diplomatic vessel was departing after routine trade negotiations. Inside, Ambassador Chun looked out at the stars and allowed herself a small smile. The message had been received. Humanity had shown the galaxy something new, something unexpected. Not that humans were the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most technologically advanced, but that they were the species that had turned their fears into art, their nightmares into stories, their terror into a tool. And in a galaxy full of species who have forgotten how to be afraid, that made humans the most dangerous of all. Chem thought about the Vrekan students learning their history lessons, about other species updating their threat assessments, about the countless civilizations that would now think twice before threatening human colonies. She thought about New Nairobi, still standing, still whole, defended without a single death. We gave them fair warning, she said quietly to her reflection in the window. What happens next is their choice. The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving Vrekan space behind. And in its wake, the message spread through the galaxy on every channel. In every language, humans are the species that learn to live with their nightmares. Don't make them share the lesson.